struggling to get a spot. And Steve came in, I think, as a 17 or 18-year-old, and he cracked the lineup. and
Wow.
So, Steve, if you could introduce yourself to Matt, the author of Hockey Priest. I think Hal Terse has joined us, and I'm not sure if Terry is on yet, but
He is.
okay.
You can
Morning,
hear me?
Terry.
Good morning. Okay,
Morning.
Steve, would you introduce yourself and how you got involved with the national team?
Sure. So, Matt, first off, my name is Steve Carlisle, and I grew up in central Alberta, played in the Alberta Junior League,
Mhm.
and then um, I happened to be going to a summer hockey school, and Terry was there. Uh, I was actually one of the sort of the assistant puck chasers at the school. There were a number of the national team members that were coaching at that hockey school. It was in Red Deer, and somehow through Fran and Terry and instructors that were there, I ended up with a ticket to go to Winnipeg to try out for the national team.
Hmm.
Uh, I guess the surprise to me was I never got cut, so it, I still had 2 years of junior, and basically they kept three of us on two scholarships. So there was Chuck Lefley, myself, and George Watson, and they didn't have enough funds to put us all on a full scholarship, so we shared two scholarships, which
Hmm.
was kind of interesting. But for us, it was great, so it didn't matter. Other than that, um, I played the last 2 years that they had that national team until it folded in 1970.
Yeah.
Um, I see, Matt, that you're from U of A. I then went to U of A for 2 years
Oh,
with Claire Drake. So,
yes, yes.
uh, and uh, and then the last part after that, the WHA came in. Edmonton had a team, so I ended up playing there for 4 years.
Oh, that's fabulous. That's fabulous. So you play with the national team in Winnipeg then for the 2 years?
Sorry, my thing keeps cutting out here. I'll have to. Okay, now I can hear you, Matt.
Okay, I was saying so you played with the national team for 2 years, and so you would have been you played in a couple world championships, I'm assuming.
Uh, yeah, the one world championship in Stockholm in what was that, 69?
Sounds right. Yeah, yeah. Well,
69.
that's
Yeah.
Well, listen, I want to sort of kick this off. And uh, Terry O'Malley, are you on, please?
I am. At least I can see you.
All right, we
Can
can't.
you hear me?
There you are. All right, buddy. Good to see you. Anyway, I've
Yeah.
got a question to kick this discussion off. And Matt, I'm going to begin with you.
sure.
All of us that have played for Father Bauer, of course, we have an affinity for the national team and a understanding of what he was all about. But how did you get to writing a book about him?
Yeah, Wally, yeah, thanks for having me. I better hold up the book, just to make it official here. It's always nice when you've worked on it for years and years that you hold it in your hands. Um, I remember as a kid hearing about Father Bauer. I would have been, I think about, I don't know, a youngster, and I was always like, why is a priest coaching or working with the national team? And later on, as an academic, and I do some work in sport, uh, meeting other academics, and I'm like, I just don't see anything really written about Father Bauer. I thought it was an incredible story about this priest, but he was a great athlete, an incredible athlete who won a Memorial Cup as a player, but then to choose the priesthood, but then to coach, and then he started this national team, and it just sounded really interesting. And so once I delved into it, I was like, well, I'll probably write an article or two about it. But once I started uncovering it and understanding his role even within Hockey Canada, his work in Hockey Canada through the 70s and 80s as well, I just thought this is such a great story. Kind of a thread in our history of the nation as well as hockey that sometimes I don't think it gets as much play as it should. And he was just and then I'm writing this during the pandemic, and there were some long days in the pandemic we all had, and I just some days you start, why am I doing this? And there was just like, this is an incredible story. This is Father Bauer's story is fantastic. It really needs to be told, whether it be the influence that he had with the national team, but also his work in Hockey Canada, his work as a priest. I just thought it was such a remarkable story. It really needed to be told. So I'm glad that it came out, and I'm glad to be the people that I interviewed were fantastic, very generous with their time, and so many folks in hockey have been so good about it.
Thanks a lot, Matt. I'm glad you wrote the book. Tom Rennie replied to me in an email. I don't know if he's going to join us today, but I bought him a copy and gave it to him as a gift.
Thanks, Wally.
Because his story of Father Bauer, he heard him speak at a banquet in Cranbrook, and that was life-changing for him in terms of pursuing a coaching career at someday, but more the perspective of the game mode sport all about, which aligned with his thinking. And of course, talk about an impact, because he went on to be CEO of Hockey Canada, and I think it just speaks well to the man that you wrote the book about. Now, I can see Terry with his feet up and relaxing, and I had a couple questions for Terry. Terry, not everybody that listens to this would have a clue about who we are and who you are, but I think it's worth talking about your background because it connects to Father Bauer probably more than any of the players that ever played for him. And I'm just wondering, how did you get to meet Father Bauer, and how did you end up on the national team?
A lot of accidents along the way, as you can see. Hello, Steve. Just like your little accident at the hockey school led to you coming to the team and then playing in the WHL and so on. I was a student, and I grew up in North Toronto, and I had a friends there, Drapers. Chris Draper played in the NHL as the son of Mike Draper, and Mike and Bruce and Dave Draper all kind of went to the same grade school I went to. It was called St. Monica's, and they were good athletes. My mother wanted me to be a piano player, and so I took that for a few years, and then in grade 7 and 8, I went back to St. Monica's. I was more interested in sport than in the piano. So I met these guys, and they were all going to go to St. Mike's. And all my brothers went to the cross town Catholic school at the time. It was called De La Salle. And my brothers went there. So I said I wanted to go to St. Mike's. And my mother said, "You want to go to St. Mike's?" She said, "Go down and register." So I went down and registered. There was a big lineup, went all the way around the school, and I got two people from the front door, and this guy in a black sedan came out, and he said, our registration's full and not taking any more people. So this guy I was with, Mike Lenhart, I still remember it clearly. He says, "We didn't line up here for 2 hours to get shut out." So we snuck around the back, climbed in a window, and went up to the front. And this big guy standing at the door with the black sedan on, he says, "What are you two guys doing in here?" "Oh, we've been in here all along," we said. "We just wanted to pass we got lost." want to give our registration in. So they took our registration, and I got accepted to St. Michael's High School. Well, my first coach was Father Bauer, and as a Bantam player, only about 17, 18 players tried out for the team, and the Drapers tried out that I knew and grew up with, and I tried out, and he became my first coach. I only played 10 games the year before and about 10 games the year before that, so I hadn't played much hockey, and he was my coach. He joined the team later on, right about this time. The coach we did have, Father Conway, was made athletic director of the school. So he didn't have time to coach the Bantam team, and Father Bauer took it over. I still remember the day, Ted Reeve-Arena. He had this black fedora on. He looked like Toe Blake, standing at the back watching the team. And Ted Reeve-Arena, Ted Reeve was a famous newspaper writer, maybe you know him. Ted Reeve-Arena used to have to jump down on the ice. And that's how we met him, when all the talk was around. And he took that team to the Bantam Championship. And then the next year, we won the Minor Midget Toronto Championship. And we had Jerry Cheevers on the team that year. And the Drapers and another guy we all grew up with, Paul Jackson. And then the next year, we played Junior B. We won the Junior B Championship. He didn't coach us that year. And then we went to St. Michael's. We're at St. Mike's. We played Junior A hockey that year as a 17-year-old. We played junior hockey. And we ended up over 3 years winning the Memorial Cup. And so that's how I got to know him. All this that we're talking about now, his vision and his vision for amateur hockey in particular, we didn't have any idea. We were just young kids trying to play hockey and make a team and have fun. And we had a lot of fun with him. He was a great coach, and that's how I met him. It was just by accident. I had to sneak into the school, and then he happened to be coaching the team that I coached, and he's been involved in my hockey junior, from Bantam right up to junior, to the University of British Columbia, which I went to, and then then the national team, and then overseas in Japan, and then he actually got me to go to Notre Dame College. So we've had a long association. That's how it all started.
Matt,
it's a long way around to tell you how it started, but that's how it started.
Okay. Matt, I'll get back to Terry again later, but reading the book, and generally speaking, I don't know if Tom Malloy's back on or not, but, I think most of us have been raised as Catholics. And so this really always intrigued me, because I ended up living with being an immigrant family, a Ukrainian Greek Catholic family, and being dragged to church every Sunday morning, and it was ritualistic as heck. But what amazes me, when I finished playing hockey, I came back and worked at St. Mary's High School, and I saw the influence of the Basilian priests. And there was a priest out there you wrote about, Father Whalehan, who was not coaching football, but I agreed to take on a junior team because I never had a coach. It was my third year of teaching high school. So can you explain a bit about the Basilians, and how did this group of gentlemen get so attached to sport and have such an influence in sport? And it appears to be, the thing that always makes me uncomfortable is the capital R religion.
Yeah.
And they seem to bring a reality of life in coaching that grounded you when you were a player. And I just wonder if you could talk a bit about that and how it evolved.
Yeah. And thanks, Terry. I liked hearing that story. We met and talked. Terry and I have been in touch for a number of years, and I don't know if I heard this full story before, Terry. So that was great. Yeah, so the Bazillion Fathers, I think what it is that people, people are kind of, you know, people get a little stiff or a little worried when they're around a priest or a pastor, minister, whatever it is. And there's these group of priests that were like, hey, we're just more regular. We like playing sports. And they were involved in sports. And of course, they're involved at St. Mike's, but the Bazillions had schools throughout North America, like you're saying, Wally, and in Calgary at St. Mary's they were down in Lethbridge. They were in the US, they're in Detroit and Rochester. So they're in a lot of cities, and a lot of cities that had that had hockey, and even ones that didn't. There was one priest I tell the story about that goes down to Houston, takes his skates, and he starts high school hockey before World War II in Houston. So what it is that instead of that heavy ritualistic side of religion, what they see it as is sport as a way to develop character, to develop people, and that through sport, people grow and mature, and especially with young boys playing sports, that instead of getting into trouble with this and that, they stick around after school and they play a sport, and in so doing, they gain leadership skills. They also just they build up school spirit and enthusiasm for the school. So it's a long tradition. Terry mentioned St. Mike's College School in Toronto, so that started way back when, just at the turn of the century, early 1900s, and you had priests running it. And then they would also have lay people, just regular folks. Probably the most famous one at St. Mike's was gentleman Joe Primo. He's the first coach to ever win a championship, Stanley Cup, Memorial Cup, and Allen Cup. He's the only coach to have ever done that. And so you had these priests that would work with kids and work with hockey people, and just thought that there was something special about it. Now, not all the priests agreed with it. Some priests thought that say, for instance, St. Mike should be more academic and it shouldn't be so much focused on hockey. But gosh darn it, they were really good at it. And the neat thing about with the priest running it, if the priest was doing it well, they got a sense of the kids. And in Bauer, for instance, he was always about developing the person. So to him, you developed a friendship with the player. You respected the difference between the player and the coach, but at the same time, it was a matter of knowing something about the player outside of hockey, that you knew who they were, something about their family, what subject they liked in school, or something else to create a bond. And from there, the sports kind of happen around that, but it really it cultivated people, and that's what I think you see with the national team, was that it wasn't just about hockey. But it was about representing your country. It was about the travel. It was about improving your skills. There was so much more to that program than simply hockey, and I think people flourished in the friendships and the bonds, and many went on to become doctors and lawyers and teachers. It's really a tribute to this model of how to coach.
Well, Matt, I only spent 1 year with the team, but it had a tremendous impact on me. And I'm really glad you explained the Brazilian influence and the coaching aspect, because I've always, because of Father Bauer, I've probably taken to heart the importance that sports can have on one's life and their skills,
Mhm.
and their service to the world. And Father Bauer, he wanted to be in the Olympics. It was just, we weren't participating. And he thought we had to have a team. I mean, we're a hockey country and we weren't. And there's no doubt about it. His team was a competition, became a competition for players for the NHL.
Yeah.
And um, Father Bauer managed to coach young men who became great players that went on to high levels. And I'm sure that if they hadn't played for him, they might not have done that because of the way he approached playing a sport and how you should evolve through the sport.
Yeah.
And that's what I learned in just 1 year. He wasn't coaching, he was a manager, he showed up occasionally. But I saw Terry, the way you guys, me as a young rookie, watching you function, communicate, authentic relationships with one another. I felt so comfortable. And the international aspect of playing other countries who were quite a bit more skilled than us, and nobody knew that.
Mhm.
And it was really an eye opener because I think we always had this sense of insecurity that, well, we weren't good enough for the NHL, but we could represent Canada, and that's what really drove me to continue to work in education and coaching many different sports like Father Bauer did. I think he did another wrestling. He wrestled. I don't know if he coached wrestling, but I just feel sport can do so much, and the influence of a coach is remarkable. And I just wanted to get that bit in here. Now, Terry,
You said, Wally, that he was a good athlete. He coached me in football too. I played a lot of football. I played football right when I played junior A hockey. Right till I was 19, I played for the senior team, and we wouldn't go to the junior practices until November. The football season was over, so he coached me in football and junior football, and he had a real approach to football, which was very straightforward. You know, blocking, tackling in a simple plays, dive right, dive left, end run, and throw passes and things like that. But he was why he was so engaging to get along with was you're right, he was a great, not just an athlete, he was a great athlete. There's a story of him, like he did win a senior football title as a university student with St. Michael's, and they played in the like the Rams and the Huskies here in Saskatchewan, and in BC they have senior football. Well, they took St. Michael's, played in that, and they won the national championship, and he was the quarterback. He told me, he says, if my fingers were just about this much longer, he says, I could have played in the CFL as a quarterback. He used to talk like that. And when he taught, you talk about getting along with the students. When he taught, now I just heard this story from another player. He taught religious studies, and the kids were whining about homework they had to do. So he said, look, he says, let's go out to the football field. So here's this teacher in his black soutane and things like this that they wore in dress shoes. He says, well, these are grade 9 students, 9 or maybe grade 10 students. He says, let's go out to the football field. You kick the football to me. And if this is a class, he had about 15, 17 students in the class. If you guys can tackle me, he says, you'll have no homework for a week. So after school, they all go out to the football field. They kick off to him. He takes the ball and runs through, chucks the soutane up in his pants and runs through the whole team. Runs through this whole team. In grade 10, I mean, you're not, you're a little awkward and ungainly, but 17 of them and beats it. So, I mean, he's the kind of guy you wanted to play for and you wanted to emulate. So it's true. He was a great athlete.
Terry, you also tell the story about his baseball, that he could pitch. So he was a great pitcher, fastball, curveballs, you name it, but he could throw with both hands, either right or left-handed.
Yeah.
And so talk about an incredible athlete. But he had an injury early on and on his right side. So then he was able to work with his left hand and he could throw. So even in hockey, I found in a yearbook, when he was playing hockey, they said that, he's going in whichever way left, shooting left, and then the way the play developed, he needed to be on his backhand, but instead he just flipped his stick. Of course, these are straight sticks, and then he shot with his right and scored. And the reporters just like, who does that, you know? And the goalie was baffled as well.
Gordie Howe did a little bit, apparently.
Okay. Well, good to be compared to Gordie Howe. Yeah.
But I mean, the story about that, where we saw this, I was walking out with Father Bauer and to the parking lot, and we had a submerged parking lot with a little bit of rise. And these other guys who were good, strong athletes, they were playing junior hockey. You might remember some of the names: Luann Gotti, Gino Ubriaco, Reg Fleming, Cesar Maniego. All those guys were playing ball because they were all boarders at the school. And I was walking out to the parking lot with Father Bauer, and they were pitching, and a fight broke out. And I can't remember with whom it was, but a good battle. But they were all Italians, so they were a little volatile. And a fight broke out. So he goes over and he breaks up the fight, and he really had to pull these guys apart. He pulled them apart. He said, "Now what's the problem here?" And these kids said, "I'm throwing strikes and he's not calling them." So the fight broke out. And so Father Bauer says, "You guys want to see strikes? I'll show you strikes." And he tucks his soutane into his pants with his dress shoes, goes out 60 feet and starts to throw. And he throws right hand, and he's throwing sliders and he's throwing fastball. He was really right-handed. He said, "But I hurt my right shoulder one time. I had to learn how to throw with my left hand." So then he starts to throw left hand. And so all these big husky, Reg Fleming was a tough character, And I don't know if you remember Reg Fleming with the New York Rangers, and Luann Gotti and Ubriaco, all big. They weren't big, but they were strong characters. He started to throw it. Everyone was gobsmacked to see this guy in his black sedan, tucked in his pants, in his dress shoes, throwing heat. And he comes in and he says, "Now, were those strikes?" The kid said, "Yes, Father, they were strikes." He says, "Well, then call strikes. Be sportsmen," he said. "Now behave yourselves." And we walked on. And that's how we resolved the problem. So he was, he could engage with people.
I think it kind of begs a question about why he became a priest. Like his brother was a Hall of Fame player. Well, became a Hall of Fame player for the Boston Bruins. Was an all-star with the Bruins. Bobby Bauer, and the family were all great athletes. Some of them played at St. Mike's, played world championships, even had some tryouts with the NHL. So they were an incredible family. And Father Bauer, when he was 16, snuck out of the house. He wanted to go to a training camp for the Bruins, and he went down to Hershey, Pennsylvania. And when he's there, tryouts going well. But when his father catches wind that he's not at home and he's trying out for this team, it didn't like it. So the dad said, "You got to come home." And in the end, he said, "You can go to St. Mike's. You can get an education and you can play hockey." And that's where Bobby had gone, and another brother. But it was this sense that the father was all about, you need to put hockey in a context. It can't be just hockey. There needs to be some bigger image of it. And so, he really was about education and about developing people and about making sure young hockey players were educated.
Yeah. His dad was really quite a religious man, and a member of the church. And that he built a rink out in his backyard. So that's where he honed his skills. It was in a tennis court. He was a great tennis player too. He was hard to beat in any sport. A golfer, he could smack the ball.
Yeah.
And he was a baseball pitcher as well. So I always remember he told the story. He mentioned that he was going into the priesthood. He'd been in the army. He said, I should be able to do more with my life than chase a puck around.
Yeah.
So coming back in the train, he had this kind of awakening that he joined the priesthood. So he announced this in the summertime, and he played baseball throughout the summer into the autumn, because you went into the seminary in October. And this guy, I think his name was Schnurr. He was an old trainer and a grizzly old guy, and they were really good friends, but he never said anything about Father Bauer joining the priesthood. And Father Bauer would tell the story with a relish. He says, we were playing our last game, and I was catching that game. And he finally came up to me. He says, Dave, he says, I've been thinking about you joining the priesthood, he says. Maybe not such a bad idea after all, he says. Why the hell should you have to work for a living? And Father Bauer laughed and laughed as he he'd tell that story with a relish. And this was his salty old trainer that he knew, and he was really well friends with. That was his advice when he said he was going to join the priesthood.
Well, Matt, the story about his father and getting him to come home and sort of have a perspective of life. And what happens with young players today is, and families, they just let their kids go at young ages, and hockey becomes what everything's all about.
Yeah.
And I think back in our era, a lot of the players weren't given the opportunity to be educated. It was sort of frowned upon. And I think as student athletes, Terry and myself and Steve, we encountered quite a bit of pushback and maybe had to be a little bit better than others to make a professional team, because it wasn't student athletes that were playing pro hockey. It was just young men with hardworking, great athletic skills who did the grind. And when they got there, pro hockey was sort of they were used, they were abused in the sense that they were subject and owned by people, and they didn't mind it. I mean, they got off the farm, made a living playing hockey, but had to have two jobs starting out. And I think now we appreciate that the importance of sport and what Father Bauer, why we played and why we pursued. And it might have prevented me from going into professional hockey because in the end, I thought, I had to make a decision about lifestyle and making an impact on people, and what good was I doing, and the fact that I was very, very average as a player. But I think the impact of Father Bauer was the program, and then the program on everybody that played in it. And it goes back to the roots of Basilian sports, priests, coaching, providing a philosophical foundation for the way they did things. And it rubbed off on the players. So, Terry, there's two things I wanted to ask you. The first thing is, you didn't start really playing hockey until you were Bantam. Like 10 games isn't much the previous year. But yet, when you were graduating from high school, you got invited or were very close to making the Squaw Valley national team. Can you talk a bit about that team and yourself?
Yeah, if I can put it into a context, when I look at Father Bauer's life, which we're looking at now, and what you've written about so well, I must say that this was thoroughly researched. I just went through the conclusion again before this meeting, and what he tried to accomplish. With Father Bauer, he met the moment, I would call it. And a lot of people that achieve things meet the moment. You never know what that moment's going to be. But he saw that hockey, which we just talked about, had some flaws in it. It played too many games. It didn't encourage hockey. There was a C form at the time that you signed that forced you to be with one team, and you couldn't even play senior hockey if you signed that C form. if you had to play with that team that you signed a C form with. And Father Bauer he actually negotiated contracts with Cesar Maniego and Dave Keon and Jerry Cheevers, Arnie Brown. And I remember Punch Imlach saying, "How the hell do you negotiate with a priest?" And you think, all these guys knew that he had the best interest of the kids at heart, and he didn't want to. None of these guys signed two-way contracts. A two-way contract is, as you know, a contract. Well, if you play in the NHL, you get this salary. If you play in the American Hockey League or the Central Hockey League, you get that salary. Well, he got all the players that he was associated with one-way contracts, whether they played with the Rochester team or the NHL team. So he wanted to change that hockey, that effort, and he had that with his brother. His brother Bobby coached the 1956 Olympic team, and they came second. And he coached the 1960 Olympic team, and they came second again. And it kind of led him to saying that we can do better than that, than bringing back seniors and reinstated pros and things like this for world championships. And maybe we can change hockey, the face of hockey and the impetus of hockey along with it. So he asked me at that time, well, he wanted me to join the team in Squaw Valley at the time in 1960. And I was, I had one more year of junior left. So I was in my second last year of junior. And the principal, I remember, and the principal was correct. He says his grades aren't good enough. He said for him to take off a month from school and then expect to get back and pass. Grade 13 was a tough slug at St. Michael's College. So the principal wouldn't let me go. Father Bauer was mad as hell at the principal, but he wouldn't let me go play in the 1960 Olympics. But it was that experience Father Bauer had with his brother and with the Olympic team, and then with the team in 1962. I think it was the Kitchener-Waterloo Dutchmen who played. They had guys like Todd Sloan and some NHL players, and they still couldn't beat it. He said, well, if we get some top junior players and university players and pull them together with what he called a team and being and played, we could get the idea across to our youth that if you pursue education and hockey at a high level, you can still compete well and you get a fuller development of the individual. So he wanted to correct the hockey situation in Canada, where at age 16, you made a decision, school or a professional dream. He says you can do both. And that was the purpose of setting up this national team and how it all got started at the time. It was, as you say in your book, a leap of faith on his part.
It was, Terry, and I didn't know that about you in Squaw Valley. I don't recall that. So that's a cool story. Yeah. But he one thing we maybe don't recognize is that now we just send teams to the Olympics, to World Championships, and they're young men and women from across the country. But it wasn't like that. It was these local senior teams that would go, but the idea of pulling people from across the country, this is before we had a national anthem, before we had a flag. We weren't as united as a country. And so it was even a harder task in that sense. Like there's really a national significance that Bauer was able to draw people from across the country. It was incredible. Like, Terry, what was that? Like, I know it was pretty humble beginnings when you went out to Vancouver and you were out there a little bit before, but when the team was gathering in the fall of '63 and you had some training camps at the U of A and elsewhere leading up to preparing for the '64 Olympics. I guess, there was a sense like, well, we're the best players available, but there must have been real pride in what you were accomplishing.
Yeah, I mean, we were, as to say that we understood the vision as you've outlined it in your book would be incorrect. We were young people that just, we loved to play hockey. We realized that, like, I was Toronto property at the time. Toronto had a good defense. You had Stanley and Horton and Bond and McNeil and guys like that. They were all good defensemen. I said, I'm not going to crack that lineup. And Father came with an idea that you could complete your education, play top Olympic hockey, international hockey, and then if you want to turn pro afterwards, it'd be a good deal. So, and not only that, you're representing your country. So it was, for young people to get an opportunity to represent your country in a sport. I mean, that's pretty exciting stuff. So I mean, we had all that in the background. We had no idea of all the juggling he had to do in order to pull it together until you kind of look back as we do now. I mean, it was a remarkable leap of faith that he could do this. And when I think about this, I made a list of the people that, he had Bob Hindmarsh, particularly in Vancouver, in the business community in Vancouver. He had Jack Hopwood in Winnipeg, and Jackie McLeod and Athol Murray, and all this tremendous support in Winnipeg. He had to pull all that together to get a team going. And then when he went to Calgary, he had that Mitchell, and he had Doc Seaman, and that. He was really an engaging character. And I think it all came from the background of his family. I went to dinner a number of times with his family, and it was a battle. It was like a boardroom battle. Equal time was the operative word, because if you gave up your platform, you never got back in again. So people would be yelling equal time. I want to get my say in here. And it went back and forth. And so he was used to he grew up with brothers and sisters, 9 of them. And so he was used to that give and take, and he knew how to meet people and to engage people. And so everywhere he went, he pulled all of this together. And we were just, I was just a young kid going out, and I'm saying to myself, why wouldn't I do this? This is tremendous. Now, we lived hand to mouth. We didn't have, when I got to Vancouver, I actually had 25 cents. That's all the money I had in my pocket when I arrived there. and we had to kind of survive. And they had a training table for us and all that sort of stuff. So we didn't care. You're a university student. You're single. You're able to manage all that. But he was able to pull together the vision of what you're playing for Canada, but what he did in the background, when I think about it, was absolutely remarkable.
And it helped players out in terms of, if they were kind of borderline, if they would make the NHL, they improved in their skills. They practiced more with the national team. They matured. They could go and be a teacher, a doctor, a lawyer. They weren't dependent on hockey, and they could negotiate a better contract too. Like, it was really beneficial for players on a number of levels.
That all came together in the 60s, and then they changed the whole draft. They turned into a draft system rather than by 1967. Yeah, and he was instrumental in getting that off the ground, when I think about it.
Well, the more you read, he was the first one to rival. People maybe know of the WHL or WHA, sorry, World Hockey Association, but his national team really, it was drawing in some good young players. Like Carl Brewer was an exceptional player that was on the national team. But Bauer's, in the summers, he's negotiating. He's meeting with Serge Savard. He's meeting with Bobby Orr. to try to get them on the national team. When the national team was ended in 1970, he writes a letter and he's complaining to those running it, and he's just like, you need to get these top players. Is anybody talking, with Marcel Dion, Guy Lafleur? Like that was his vision for it. It was not just a secondary theme, but let's think big and represent the country well.
Yeah, he pushed. He he was close with Bobby Orr. Serge Savard, apparently, when I hear the story, he was getting on the airplane. You used to have to get in and go up those little steps to get on the airplane. And he was going to come out to the camp in 1967. He was on the plane to go out there. And Sammy Pollock went out right to the tarmac. Now, this is the rumor. And he had the Montreal Canadiens sweater. He put this in Serge Savard's face. He says, if you join that national team, you'll never wear this sweater. He said, and Serge Savard, who would be the Canadian, so he marched down, didn't make the trip out west. Yeah. So that's when you talk about the competition for players. Yeah. That was a huge thing. And it was really he was up against that all the time.
Yes.
Right to the 90s till now. It's just, as you point out in the back part of your book, it's now it's an NHL team. And when the Olympics finally went professional, his whole ideal vanished, so that amateur ideal vanished with it when they went Olympics with professionals.
Yeah, it did.
Now it's great hockey. You can't deny that. So.
Well, that's it. And even when the team came back in the late 70s and represented the country at Lake Placid in 1980, it was a different model of team. Terry had mentioned the team in being. It was going to be players coming together for major tournaments, but it would be a cohort of guys. And so even though it was changing and there's more cooperation with the NHL at this time because the NHL had gotten more involved in international hockey, even with those changes, it was still at its heart the national team that Father Bauer had dreamed of. With more room for skill development, camaraderie, patriotism. A lot of his ideas still carried on, even well into the 80s and beyond. So
in the 90s, sure, Tom Rennie and Dave King, they both represented that well. Yeah, when I think about it.
Didn't they?
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Terry, I have a question. There must have been a time when you could have played in the NHL, signed a pro contract, and gone that route. What happened?
Well, it was close. I was negotiating with the Leafs in '69, and we were a couple of thousand short. I didn't have an agent or anything like that. And I said, I said to myself, if they're going to be a cheapskate for a couple of thousand, which I was married at the time for a couple of thousand, and I can teach. I had a job with fitness and amateur sport, and I said, I don't need this action. The year before, I was negotiating with Minnesota North Stars after the 1968 Olympics. A lot of players turned pro with the 1968, and I'd heard some stories about the boys went down. Ren Blair was the manager. Now he was an enthusiast and a no nonsense character, and he liked to win. And they were playing pool. The guy told me this story, and I was still, because I was writing exams, I was still back home. I didn't go down with the boys to meet the team and that. And they were playing pool with Danny O'Shea and Kenny Broderick. And Barry McKenzie. They were playing pool, and Danny O'Shea was with Ren Blair, and he missed a shot. And Ren Blair took his pool cue, broke it over the table, and called him a loser and all this sort of thing. And I said to myself, I'm not signing with this guy. He said, I said, why would I put my family and life in his hands in Minnesota? So I didn't sign. So then I played another year with Steve, as Steve points out, and then I eventually went to Japan and never turned pro. But I had a couple of opportunities to sign professional. That's true, and I just didn't. That was all. Didn't look like it was worth it to move my family around in such a, because I was just an average player. I was, I would have been a fifth or sixth defenseman, very expendable. But I'm saying I'm not going to put my family in that position. So I didn't.
Well, I don't know. Steve Carlisle, are you still on?
He is.
I'm really curious, Steve, because you ended up continuing to play hockey, a stint with the Oilers, you experienced a professional environment, and then you went back to the U of A, I believe. And I don't know if the story's right, but it's the same old. A national team player gives it a go, but you took a different route in life in the long run. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure, Wally. So first off, Terry, you're selling yourself a little short. As a young guy coming in, I learned a lot from you. So you could have easily made it as a pro. I appreciate finding out how that didn't happen and how you ended up in Japan, which was probably a really good experience for you and your family, because you were there for a while. And so that's kind of my first comment. Second comment, back to your question, is, yeah, I sort of, I went back to the U of A after being with the national team. I was drafted by Montreal, and as with Terry, couldn't negotiate a very good contract. It came back to, it was, they were looking at a two-way, and I wasn't really interested, so I went back to school. Spent 2 years with the U of A team. Really learned a lot from Claire Drake, who had that same kind of team philosophy that Father Bauer had. So again, another really good learning experience. When I signed with the WJ, came into effect in 1972, so I signed with that first Oiler team. Played there for 4 years. Ultimately, I'd sort of set a goal of playing for 5 years, and um, and I continued my education all the time that I was playing. I would always take summer classes, spring session classes. And then when I finished after 4 years, I went back to school for 1 year and then started my teaching career, and did that for 30 years, basically. So that's sort of how I got, um, always with the national team. It was education first, and then putting all the rest of your effort into improving your hockey skills. Um, as Terry had mentioned earlier, we had a lot of chance to practice. We had great opportunities to travel. We had really good coaching. So it was, and as again Terry said, we were just young guys that were enthusiastic about what we were doing. I don't know, does that help, Wally?
No, I think it puts everything into perspective in terms of what all of us achieved and sports was the vehicle, um, given the right direction of the way you played it and how we were led growing up. I think that was a huge impact. It wasn't all about winning and money and you. It was sort of about team first and personal development, not just academically, athletically, but also morally in terms of uh, doing things the right way. And I that's what amazes me about the national team. It's had reunions and reunions and reunions, and thank God I got to attend what might be the last reunion. And Steve, thank you for the ride to the ferry to visit my brother-in-law after that reunion. But the team was special, and the people there. I don't know how many reunions Terry has been to, but there's an affinity with that group, a tightness with that group, and I think the common thread is the spirit of Father Bauer behind the whole thing. Now,
That's true.
Terry, you wrote an article years ago. I don't know how long ago, why you wrote it, but it may have been after Father Bauer's passing or before. I have no idea. But you called him a saint. Can you talk about that article? Because it speaks to the impact of that man.
Yeah. Well, I used the quote from Leonard Cohen. What is a saint? A saint is someone who achieves a remote human possibility, and it has something to do with the energy of love. That's how he starts it out. You never know where it's going to land you, but you risk everything to put it into effect. And the reason I look at that, not in terms of miracles and all that sort of thing within the church, but I look at it as when people love something, and he seemed to love sport and the sport of hockey. He wanted to do something with it that was outside of the norm, a remote human possibility. And that's how, when you start your book, A Leap of Faith, I mean, he didn't have a team, he didn't have players, he didn't have uniforms, he didn't have a schedule, he didn't have any money, and he was going to run the Olympic team in 1964. Well, who does that? And that's what he took on. And he achieved what I call a remote human possibility, which was establishing the Olympic team. And it had something to do with his love of hockey and his love of the people that are involved in hockey. And he wanted them to have a better opportunity to develop fully. And that was his background, to get a full, development in amateur sport. He calls it amateur, means not mature in one sense. Mature, not mature. So you're trying to help these young people to mature. And if you're in that position, then you look for the full development of the player. You don't overtax them. You don't play them beyond their ability to do something else in life. And so that was the background to that particular story. He would never have called himself a saint. As a matter of fact, the thing that made him lovable was that he was so human. He was passionate about things. He was argumentative. He was all those things, and very human as well. I'm trying to remember. We went to Notre Dame, Barry McKenzie and I, and he was leaving. He was leaving Notre Dame and going to go back to Vancouver. And he says, I haven't been, this tells you what Notre Dame was like when we first arrived there in 1978. He says, I haven't been as good a priest as I could have been, he said, but I haven't been that bad. He says that I have to spend the rest of my life here in Wilcox, Saskatchewan. So back he went to Vancouver. I says, well, what the hell does that mean for burying me? You know, because we did spend the rest of our life there. We must have been bad characters. So in any case, that was a story. I didn't write it to, people that really accomplish things. When I think about them, when I think of Athol Murray, who I know pretty well, and I did a thesis on Athol Murray. He met the moment. He says, here we are in the midst of a depression, and things are as bad as they can be. People are leaving the province. The kids have no opportunity. So he started a university program for them to keep them involved in intellectual activity until the economic cycle changed. And it went on to become quite a remarkable little school. But he started with absolutely nothing. And when I think of Mother Teresa, for example, she started with 2 rupees, went out into the streets of Calcutta and met the moment, picked a dying guy up, put him into an abandoned building, showed him some care and love as he died. And that was, and at the end, this is 1972, by 1998, when she died, she had 10,000 postulants and 1,500 houses of charity around the world. Started with absolutely nothing. And so that's what I call a remote human possibility. And you can see that not just but you see it in art, and you can see it in people that really make something of their lives. They often start with absolutely nothing and find a way to work through all the adversity to make it happen. And never easily, of course. And so when I wrote that paper, I wrote it for Barbara Bauer, his niece, who asked me to do a paper for her on my experience with Father Bauer. And so it talks about how I met him, when I discussed that earlier on, his coaching philosophy. He had a really defensive coaching philosophy because he never had the talent. So he says, if you don't have the talent, you got to learn how to play defense. So we played Bantam that year. We won the city championship. We had a goalie that couldn't stop a beach ball. So he says, well, you got to keep these guys from shooting outside the blue line. So we had to learn all the foot skills to be able to stand up and keep these guys from shooting inside the blue line. So we ended up becoming quite adept at mobility and that sort of thing, because he practiced all these backward skating drills and checking drills and so on to make us good defensively. And of course it was his bane all the way through. I remember we had one of our reunions, and he was there at this reunion. We started the reunions in the 1980s. I think our first one was in Gimli, Manitoba. Oh, sometime I can't even remember, back in, maybe it was 1970 something, 1972 or so, or 4. And he was at one of these reunions, and he pulls us aside and he says, you guys, he says, if any of you could have just got 1 or 2 goals, he says, in one of those crucial games down the years, he said, perhaps I could have been a bishop, even a cardinal. So he never had guys that could score. So his focus was always defensive first, and then move out from defensive to offensive. Yeah. And then the game has changed dramatically since then. I mean, my goodness, 5 men moving in, the conditioning of the players, the teamwork and the play. And it's so good defensively now that guys like Connor McDavid, they play a penalty kill system against Connor McDavid, and then kind of see if they can outmatch them with the other lines. Connor McDavid has trouble, even with all his skills, scoring, with the goaltending being as it is. The nets haven't changed. The players have got bigger. They've become more mobile. So it's a different game entirely, but defense, as we all know, still wins games.
Mhm.
That's, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's how I wrote that article.
A great article, Terry, and it's really interesting for those that are listening. But Terry, you became principal of Notre Dame, and I was working with the national women's team at the time, and you brought me out there, and I got to spend some time and stay at your place with your wife and interact with the coaches and the students. It was really a remarkable experience. And at the time, the national women's team, I felt, Matt, and I've spoken to this at Hockey Canada functions, Father Bauer would have dreamed to have a national team. The women's team was sort of the emulated what he couldn't have, because all the very best players came to that program and it's thrived. And I think the idea of doing things the right way, developing people and moving on from sport is what it was all about. Now we've got professional hockey, women's hockey, and that's opportunity. It's a democracy. You can choose to go where you want, make what you want. And I think in the end, whether it's the NHL or the national team, I think the teams that really succeed do things the right way. They develop character. They have everybody feel valued parts of the team, and they're well led, and they feel a part of teams. So it doesn't matter what level you play at, where you play. Um, the best team wins in the end, and that's sort of a philosophy I've taken over many years of coaching different sports, football in particular, and hockey, and ringette with my daughters growing up. That just building a team with a kind of philosophy of development being the foundation of why you're doing it. And it's not just the skills, it's the work ethic, it's the effort and respect that is required to be the best you can be. And that's John Wooden's definition of winning. So I credit, my sort of adherence to that with the 1 year of experience that I had with the national team. And you talk about the influence of people in your lives. And it was the program and the players that I got to connect with, rub shoulders with in a program that Father Bauer created. And it's something that to this day I'm dedicated to serving the good of the game, which I think Father Bauer absolutely walked that talk. So, Matt, you might have heard all these stories before.
Not all of them, but I love your words, Wally. They are inspirational. They're aspirational. What one neat thing I found about Father Bauer was that hockey changed a lot during his time. Terry was mentioning that just how different hockey is today, but it changed a lot for him. And when the teams were first playing against those Soviet teams, it was, it brought to Canadians' attention how our development programs weren't where the Soviets were. Bob Heimarch, he talked about in the late 1960s going over to the Soviet Union and seeing their nutrition, their conditioning, their weight training was just light years ahead of what we were doing in Canada, and that we needed to develop better players. And Father Bauer was for that, but what he didn't like after all, by 1980 with that team, Terry was on the Lake Placid team as well, was that he started thinking that hockey might be getting too scientific. Like his fear was that there's such an emphasis on team systems and skills, which are necessary, that we forget about those human connections, about that team spirit, about the human side of the sport. And that, he would think about, if it's not international play, like, what's the losing team going to get out of this sport? Because only one team can ever win. What is it? What is the sport? What can it give overall? And that's where the national team was great, about increasing the patriotism in the country, but developing the skills, but also having these cultural exchanges, involving education, putting hockey in a larger frame that would really build up young people and leaders in the world. And what better way to do it than in sport? I think our day-to-day world, there's a lot of pressures on young people today, and the challenges they face, just even to buy a house, and they face these challenges, and it really came. I think he saw that in that dressing room, working with young people, challenging their character, that idea of struggle and emerge, right? Challenging them and really bonding them together. I think that he saw that sport could really, and I like this quote. He said, before the Calgary Olympics, he said, in a small way, sport can improve the world. It's not everything, but it really can make a difference in a lot of people's lives. And he believed in that throughout his life. He had this vision, whether it be when he was coaching, whether he was with Hockey Canada or at the Olympics. He really believed it did make a difference in the world. And it wasn't just about economics. It wasn't just about winning or entertainment, but there was something more to hockey.
Yeah, he had another quote in 1980: "Be a flash of brilliance." Halley's Comet was coming by the Earth at that time. Be a flash of brilliance in the troubled world. Just
nice. I heard that.
You can just be a flash. That's what a team does. It's just kind of a moment where you see a group get together, and if it pulls it all together in a dramatic way, then you can be a flash of brilliance in a troubled world. Yeah. So, he had a quote. He told me one time, he said, "You'll be known as a great coach, not by your wins or losses, but by how well you can treat the players you can't play that much, or in crucial situations." And God, that's hard to do. It's hard to really, but he got to know every player on the team, and even those that he knew that he couldn't, you can only dress 19. You can't dress. So you have some players that you can't dress for games, and you still have to show their worth. And he would always have time for them and spend time with them, but I must say, it is a hard thing to do. But that was one of the pieces of advice he gave me as I coached in amateur hockey.
I know Mickey McDowell, a national team member early on, he would speak of that. He said he would marvel at Bauer, how he could take the weakest player on the team and give him one role. And you do this, and you might not be playing in that game much, but this is what we need. We need the absolute best out of you. And he was able to draw that out of players. He would often choose different captains. I don't know if this was always true, Terry, but he would pick a different captain for a particular moment, whether it was the city you were playing in or whatever's going on personally for the player, or they had to raise their game because of who they were playing against. He would call upon different people to be captains. Was that a frequent theme, Terry?
Well, in '64 he did it. He wasn't really the head coach after that. He was the manager and behind. But in '64 he had 4 different captains, and in Roger Bourbonnais and Henry Ackerville, myself, Barry McKenzie, and so on. And he eventually went with Henry Ackerville for the Olympic team in '64.
Okay.
So, but he had different captains at times. Yeah. He might have done that. We're playing, and we weren't always privy to how they came to all those decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Matt, I wanted to bring up the point of the Olympics and Father Bauer's desire to participate. And I think the the foundation and the thinking behind that of the Olympics was the Olympic rings and the five continents of the earth in sport competing together, not against one another. Um, and I think that he really believed that it could change the world.
Mm-hmm.
And the Olympics are a time where all the countries of the world do compete in sport. And I grew up Ukrainian immigrant family. My father left the Soviet Union as a 17, 18-year-old to escape the Stalin regime.
Mm-hmm.
And war was, really intrigued me. In fact, I studied war and wondered about causation. Why is there war? And I've always felt human beings killing one another is rather tragic. And I just don't feel that there's a need to go to war. And, it's sort of like Terry mentioned at the Bauer supper table. Everybody can get to express themselves and be themselves and hold the floor when you get it. But you don't battle over your disagreements. You learn to agree to disagree. And one of the things I came up with as a coach, it sort of puts us into a philosophy is, you know, I think a coach's job and a player's job is to make the opponent better. And that takes the winning and your own ego of wanting to win out of it. Obviously, you're trying to beat the best. You're trying to win. That's why you play the game. And the only way you're going to do that is if you make each other better. So win or lose, losing, you made them better. And when you win, they made you better because they did things and pushed you to a limit that you never knew. And that's what sports do. The idea of playing a team sport and the impact it has on those athletes moving forward in life and a job, they'll get hired in a flash because they can work together. And that's what sport teaches you, how to work together and how to earn a role and play a role. And um, I'm just so thankful to be able to still be involved at my age and very young girls and girls hockey Calgary. But I try to push that philosophy, create that kind of a culture with this organization. Actually, with Hockey Canada, years ago, in the Dave King era, we wrote a mission statement exercise for coaches to deliver to their parents and players to be embedded in the organization of knowing the purpose of what you're doing, why you're doing it, and identifying the values behind the sport that are required to be the best you can be. And I credit that to one short year many years ago, and so thankful just to have you on, Matt and Terry and Steve, um, to be able to share thoughts on Father Bauer. I wish I knew him better, knew him personally. I can't say I said more than 30 words to him in my lifetime. I just sat back and it was like osmosis. You felt, you sensed the spirit. So Terry, Matt, you wrote, you talked about um, the game and the over analysis and the over coaching and Father Bauer's concern with taking away the spirit of the game. And I shared a story that you write about in the book at the 2002 Olympics, where the staff brought me in and wanted some advice on how to forecheck when you lose the draw. And in my time, in that time, I just said to them, you got the best players in the world. I think they'll figure it out. It's a simple game. You can tell them what to do, but when you have Marilyn Lemieux and all these best players together, telling them what to do and creating your strategy, thinking it will win, would be a distraction. And I think Pat Quinn was thankful for that intervention. And in the end, they played pretty well, winning a gold medal. And they could have lost. I mean, they were lucky to win because of the bounce of the puck, but that's the way sports go. And I really like that let the spirit prevail concept. In the end, it's you can have all the X's and O's, and you can have all the drills and all the power plays you want, face-off strategies you want, but the player plays. And to play, you really have to feel free on the ice. So there's that line between strangling them and freeing them, and staying within the bounds of respecting a team. So
FIO, Wally, has been a figure it out. Has been a mantra we've used down the years. When I think about values and the Olympics, and the end of your book, Matt, talks about values. And when I was in Japan, it was interesting. Japan will not let professionals coach amateurs. I think, what a waste. These guys are so immersed in what's required to be successful. But it's just that the values of a professional and the values of an amateur are different. And so it all goes through the school system, and they produce some pretty good ball players. As we all know, Shohei Ohtani is not a bad ball player, but he grew up in a system where in his developmental years, the education system, at least that was when I was there, I don't know if it's still the case, wouldn't allow professionals to coach amateurs because the values are just so different. The values are if you don't win, you're not valuable, so you're disposable. That's the pressure on them, and we all know. I mean, I watched the New York Yankee game last night, and I'm listening to the coach Boone, I think his name is, with the Yankees. At the end, he says, he says, it's disheartening. He says, but I love, he loved the effort that the players put in. They had a bad fifth inning. Defense lost the game for them, as we say. But the values were all apparent in this talking of the summary of the game and the summary of the series. Values are what really they remember, not winning or losing. But if you don't win in professional sport, you don't last. That's the ultimate value. And so they wouldn't let them get involved at the amateur level. So I find it interesting when the professionals got involved in amateur hockey in Canada, that we all know that who won the ultimate battle in the end. Values didn't, but the values of professional, if you don't win, you don't last.
You're right, Terry. And that's what Father Bauer was trying to do with the national team. Let's create another stream that isn't so professionalized, and that we can cultivate people, education, still have great hockey. And he saw that they had different aims, and that you're kidding yourself to think that different aims won't conflict, right? That there will be a battle of ideas. And and you can see that it's hard when the model is, minor hockey. The model's the NHL, which is great. I watch games all the time, but the challenge is that how do we ensure that our young people aren't faced with a professional model when they're 12 years old? That it's not set up. Do we think about the human spirit? Are we thinking about friendship? Do we put that balance into it? And I think a lot of people do, and a lot of people are concerned about that. And there's a lot of good things done, but there's always that tendency to move in that way. He had just such an energy for people. And I love that line, be a flash of brilliance in a troubled world. I think maybe you had said that years ago to me, Terry. It's coming back to me, but I think that's really it. And the enthusiasm, he had a great enthusiasm for hockey. He was a competitor. He wanted to win. He was driven, but yet putting it in a proper context is great.
Yeah.
I just have to say, I got to teach in a little bit, and I got to get into the university. So I think I have to leave in a couple minutes here, Wally.
Okay.
I hate to do that, but
Before you go, I don't know if you can read that. The title, what does it say?
yeah, hockey life lessons.
Right. I'm doing a mission statement exercise with all the teams and girls hockey Calgary. And it's all about what we're talking about.
Yes.
That's why you play hockey, minor hockey. And this particular sheet, and I've backed it up with the team covenant created by Tom Malloy's team that's basically values based, not outcome based.
Yes.
And teams that do this the right way, they win more often than teams that don't. And I think that message is really critical. I'm so glad, Matt, you could join us. I think Tom's still on. We usually shoot the breeze. And before you leave, Tom taught in the separate system for years. And at one time, he was in the seminary. So he decided, and I was going to ask him that question, I might later when you leave, about what caused him to change his mind and get back into teaching, because he's my age, I think 77 now, still playing 3 times a week and coaching a team full time, a U13 girls team. So
Nice.
Talk about commitment to serving the game.
That's incredible. That's fantastic. Well, and all of you, it's been great to meet you, Steve. I got to look you up at the U of A here when I get back to campus. And Terry, I just love listening to your stories about Father Bauer. It's your friendship has just been wonderful over the years, and thanks for that. Same for you, Wally. Your friendship and both of your passion for hockey and what it is. It's sometimes as a prof, I get in my world and you write this book and you hope that it resonates. And when it resonates with you guys, it means a lot to me, because I try to do something as accurate as possible, and and maybe more importantly, in the spirit of Bauer. And it seems that that's coming through to you, and that means a lot to me. So, and thanks for this, and thanks for the opportunity to be on your podcast, Wally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Take care,
Thanks,
Matt.
Matt. Nice to meet you.
Thanks, Wally.
And, I enjoyed your book.
Take care.